Welcome to episode 37 of The Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. This week we speak to ADVrider.com columnist Nick Adams. Where most owners of Italian motorcycles head down into the mountains, the affable Adams gleefully points the front wheel of his 50-year-old Moto Guzzi into the wilds of northern Canada for long solo trips. Why? Stick around, you'll find out. But before we dive into our conversation with Nick, a word from our sponsor. Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. But don't fret, it's okay, because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got simply everything. Brake rotors, lights, and tire exhaust systems, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love. Let's get into it. Nick, I'm going to start with a quote of yours, and then I'd like you to respond to it. I think there's some interesting stuff here. And you said, quote, "The normal bucket list stuff, Paris in springtime, the Taj Mahal, the Isle of Man tourist trophy, swimming with sharks, have never held interest for me," unquote. So if that doesn't interest you, in terms of motorcycling, what does interest you? What gets you going?
I think well, as you and probably some of the other readers are aware, I like being off on my own, preferably in the middle of nowhere, preferably on an old bike, perhaps the road being a little bit squirrely, lots of trees, lots of water, lots of rocks. That's the kind of environment I enjoy.
Now you don't just, but you also, now you know, it would be one thing, because adventure touring is of course a thing, and this site is sort of geared to that. But you don't do it on an adventure touring motorcycle. So you do it mostly on your old 1972 Moto Guzzi Eldorado. 72, is that right?
72, yeah.
What is the relationship you have with this bike, and what is it about that bike and dirt roads that seem to hit some kind of sweet spot for you?
Well, I think first of all, when I started riding again after a 30-year hiatus, because I came to Canada and looked at the winter and said, nah, it's not a year-round activity, why bother? And at that point, well, the motorcycle scene just didn't appeal to me very much. But I did enjoy the environment. I did enjoy northern Canada particularly. And when I started looking for another bike, the first one that popped out at me was something quite attractive, was the old Eldorado. And it was only later that I discovered that it was surprisingly capable once the pavement ends. It's got a very low center of gravity. It rolls along. It's got lots of torque. It's, I guess in modern terms, it doesn't handle particularly well, but it handles well enough for me and the kind of riding I do. And I never feel out of my depth riding on it.
And self-admittedly, you are a slow rider.
I'm a slow rider certainly in modern terms. I mean, if I was on those roads along with other people on perhaps more modern bikes, they'd probably be zooming by. But at the end of the day, I would catch them up. I mean, 600 miles, 1,000 miles, I've done those kind of distances without any kind of trouble. It's just I don't do it in short bursts from here to there.
So you're a tortoise, in other words.
I'm a tourist. Yeah, I like.
Sorry, I said a tortoise.
A tortoise. Oh, a tortoise. Yes. Well, I'm one of those too. Mentally,
I wouldn't call you a tourist, but tortoise, yes.
Well, we're all tourists. We all complain about the fact that places we might want to visit are full of tourists, but we're not looking at ourselves. We're just looking out through our own eyes.
Well, other people are tourists, and we're not. Of course, we have a right to be there, and they should just all leave us alone. Now, what do you think it is about solo travel? And it's sort of solo, slow. The fewer people, the better. Not only traveling with you, but around you. Because, I mean, some of the journeys you've taken that I've read on ADVrider.com, where we both write, you'll do incredible distances to really what I think of as very desolate country. And these are not, see, when I head out, I go to Pennsylvania or the mountains or something with twisty roads, and you seem to head off in the other direction from the direction I'm headed. And what is it about long, what I think of as barren stretches of road that appeals to you so much? Is it some sort of inner journey you're more interested in than an outward journey?
I think growing up in England has a lot to do with it, where, you know, for the most part, the roads are busy. Everywhere you turn, there's a town. You can't drive for 5 miles without a village or a stop sign or you know, some kind of encumbrance on the road. And in northern Canada, it's not like that. You know, one of the comments I get on some of the videos I do is that there are no cars. You know, you ride for X number of hours and you don't see any traffic. And to me, that's very enjoyable. But also, I like the scale of the forests and the lakes and the woods. I just those kinds of that kind of environment just appeals to me. I don't find it tedious or boring at all.
Would you describe yourself as in day-to-day life as a bit of a loner? Is that fair to say?
Possibly. But I'm fairly sociable. I have a small group of people that in my immediate area that I end up, you know, we'll say, let's go to lunch at such and such a place, and we'll all ride up independently and have lunch together, and then all ride away independently as well. And that's fine.
Is that lunch spot 300 kilometers of gravel road away, or is it nearer than that?
Sometimes. You know, I have one friend in, well, not maybe 300 miles of gravel road, but, you know, I have one friend at the other end of the province, and we'll meet up in Halliburton. So it's about, I don't know, 300-mile day each in order to get there for a short lunch and a bit of a chat, and then whatever ride we decide to take on the way home independently.
One thing we share, I think we do, well, here's the question, whether you agree with me or not, is that when a motorcycle breaks down, you never want it to happen. Of course, immediately when you hear that weird clunk when you're traveling, especially by yourself, as you often are, there's that, you know, oh shit moment. But there's also something you can really gain through that, a certain kind of self-reliance. At least that's how I think of it. And there's something that happens to the mind when you really have to solve a problem, especially in our society where we're a cell phone call away from road assistance. I mean, often you're out of cell range, and you just have to figure it out on your own. Do you get kind of a gas out of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like anybody else, when it actually happens, I go, oh shit, and that's the first reaction. But then there's the sort of troubleshooting process kicks in, and I do enjoy that. I mean, I don't look for things to break down, but I know enough about myself to know that I sometimes do head off on long trips on a bike that isn't as well prepared as it ought to be. Knowing that there's a likelihood that somewhere along the line something might happen. But the flip side of that is I'm a sort of traveling workshop. I have a pretty comprehensive set of tools with me, and short of, you know, busting a main bearing or throwing a rod or something, I can probably cope with it on the road.
Now, you've had a few trips, long distance trips, that you didn't make it home. I think I read one piece of yours where you're in, where were you, in Labrador or Newfoundland, something, and you had a friend who was a very good friend coming an awfully long way to save you. Can you tell me a bit about that trip?
Yeah, that was on the North Road, which runs between the Billy Diamond Highway in northern Quebec across to Chibougamau. It's 410 kilometers of gravel road. It's basically a big gravel highway, and I was riding it on my 1974 Nuovo Falcone, which is, you talk about slow bikes. It maybe on a good day, you might reach 70 miles an hour flat out, but it's a 500 single. But it was a perfectly good bike for that particular road. It just plugs along quite comfortably. The trouble was, I got a puncture. No big deal. You know, you usually have the equipment to deal with a puncture on the road. So I stopped, pulled the back wheel out, pulled the tube out, pulled my spare tube out and put it in. I realized later I didn't check the carcass of the tire as well as I should have done. So I got about 20 miles up the road and had another puncture. And it was at that point I realized that I hadn't packed a puncture repair kit. I got everything else, but except a way to fix a hole rather than just replace a hole. So I had a pathetic attempt at filling the carcass of the tire with spruce boughs and various bits of vegetation to try and get some bulk into the tire carcass. And that just about got me to the Rupert River. And as luck would have it, there was a hydro work crew there, and the young lady that I bumped into there said, I got a satellite phone. Is that any use to you? Well, yeah, I'll just give Norm a call, because at various times we'd said to one another, if you're really stuck, just give us a call and I'll come and get you. It works both ways. So far, it hasn't happened the other way. So Norm, being the kind of person he is, just loaded up the trailer on the back of his car and drove the 1,700 miles, I think it is, some awful distance anyway, from Sydenham in Ontario up to where I was stuck on the Rupert River, basically driving all night, and got there the middle of the next day.
And let me guess, you have not forgotten your puncture kit since that moment.
You're absolutely right.
Why is it we only learn through our own mistakes? I mean, it seems like everything worth knowing is sort of arbitrary and abstract until you really screw it up yourself. And then it's sort of in your bones, and you'd never do it again, would you?
No, you learn to keep your fingers out of the way of the hammer. It's the same kind of thing. You've got to hit them once before the message really gets through.
Now, we're going to have a conversation about technology, and I often make this quip about people who rue technology, and because around where I live, there's lots of Amish and Mennonites, and of course they use a horse and buggy, and they will build you a barn, but they will not use electricity that comes from the grid. They will use a gas burning generator to make electricity to power the tools. Which makes me think of this old New Yorker magazine cartoon where one caveman hands another caveman a spear, and the caveman goes, "Oh, no, I'm a technophobe." The point being that everything is technology. And I know you're a smart enough man to agree with me. So a wagon is technology, clothing is technology, a hammer is technology. But am I right to presuppose that you think there's a line that we should or shouldn't have crossed when it comes to technology and motorcycles?
I don't know about shouldn't have crossed. There's a line there, for me at least, that is too far. There are things that I don't feel I need on a motorcycle. And, things like self-leveling suspension and the whole list of things that there are laden onto modern bikes seem just to me to be a way for manufacturers to impress and attract people to buy their bikes. Now, I should qualify that by saying, with the kind of riding I do and the kinds of places I go, I don't think those technologies would enhance my pleasure in riding. They might make it possible to ride a little faster, perhaps a little safer. But if you're out on a motorcycle trip to enjoy the environment through which you're passing, going faster doesn't seem to be something which is of really any value to me. I see this on people's reports about riding the Translab Highway before it was paved, and it was like they get on and then ride flat out to get to the other end. It was almost as if they seemed wary or scared even of stopping. They just wanted to make the journey over as fast as possible. Whereas for me, I think the the pleasure in riding comes from stopping, taking pictures, ambling along, riding safely. I make no bones about the fact that I don't like to fall off. So I ride at a speed where I can pretty much assure that that's not going to happen.
Now, do you have heated hand grips on your Guzzi?
No, I do have a pair of heated gloves that plug in, which I've used on, when it's really cold.
So you're willing to accept some degree of comfort?
Some, yeah. I've never gone as far as a heated vest or anything like that. But I should qualify that by saying I'm pretty resistant to the cold. I'm not somebody that gets desperately cold easily.
That's because you come from the land of eternal dampness.
That could be too.
Yeah. And as a Canadian, that's saying something. I don't think I was on the coast of Scotland years ago, and it was above freezing, comfortably above freezing. Well, uncomfortably above freezing. But the wind, I don't know what it is about that, but it just goes absolutely through you.
Yeah, when you spend your teenage years standing in bus stops at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when it's pitch black and raining and 1 degree above freezing, and you're wearing just a gabardine mac over your school blazer, you learn to know about cold and damp.
For our 7th inning stretch, some words provided by our sponsor. Picture this: you're in the garage, your favorite room in the house, which is, of course, not in the house. And you're tuning up your engine with parts that you found on eBay. Each piece is just locking perfectly into place. You step back to admire your work, hands covered in grease. And because you're committed to riding that thing further than the odometer can even handle, you start thinking to yourself, you know what? I could probably use some new brakes, maybe a shock. This baby deserves a new air filter. So you head right back to eBay. You can find anything you need there. It's unreal. From headlights to air filters to exhaust systems, all the way to those carbon fiber rims you've been fantasizing about. eBay is the stocked garage of your dreams. And you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit, because eBay knows DIY fixes can be major and mods are always intense. So you need to know those parts are guaranteed to fit every time. Before you dive in, wrench first. And on the off chance you order a part and it doesn't fit, send it back. Simple as that. You know what you love more than your bike itself, and that is, of course, riding it. You're serious when it comes to engine maintenance and locked in when you're headed into a build. And that's exactly why you start with eBay. Minor fix or complete overhaul. You want to get your ride back on the road, and you've got eBay's Guaranteed Fit. So eBay created My Garage, where all you have to do is add your ride's info to get the exact parts that fit. When you see a green check, you're a click away from that part clicking perfectly into place. So now that you know all of this, just imagine standing at that open garage door looking at the bike you love more than anything, knowing that anything is possible, whether it's keeping it on the road forever or turning it into something that's never been on the road before. Because with eBay, your garage just got a whole lot bigger. Get all the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. Now back to my conversation with Nick Adams. The Lowdown Show is presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. One of the things that you've written about, which I thought was really compelling, is the phases that one goes through when setting out on a long journey. And you've written that an hour and a half ride doesn't really hold much interest to you. It's a full day ride, or even better, a week ride or a month ride that really interests you. And can you take me through those steps that one, as you've articulated, the steps that you go through as you sort of acclimate to life on the road?
Yeah, I think particularly with the older bikes, there's a sort of magic moment where you decide that the bike is performing reasonably well enough, and you're in the groove. You're sort of feeling it. You're feeling the journey, and it's a sort of a point of no return. It's usually about 200 or 300 miles from home. You're still within close enough range that you can get back and sit back on the couch at the end of the day and say, oh, well, I'll start again some other time. But if you get past that moment, then it's almost a sort of liberation. You can feel the road ahead and know that, you know, the journey's going to proceed in the way that you hoped it might.
But you've also talked in that same thing. You've also talked about, you know, on the first day, you know, you're listening to the machine, and then the second day, especially, much of your traveling is camping. In the second day, you know, the aches and pains, and you know, will start to come in.
Yeah.
And then at some point, it seems like your third day is the point at which, you know, and I think you wrote it beautifully, and did I have it written down here stuff? But you sort of just settle into it, and you realize, well, this is what I do.
Yeah.
And, you know, in the way that sometimes, you know, we are as humans are like to reject reality until it's forced upon us. But if you're going away for a month and you're 3 days in, well, you wake up, you eat, and you ride, and that's what you do. And you seem to, for you anyway, it seems like on that third day, you just accept that.
Yeah, I thought that's something that emerged or became obvious to me, first on long canoe trips in Northern Ontario, and also on sort of extended hiking trips. The first couple of days are just, and on motorbike trips too, the discomfort and pain often characterize those first couple of days. But by the third day, you're either going to turn around and say the hell with this, or you're in the groove, and it's, you know, you can basically, as you say, get up in the morning, get on the bike and go, because you've left all those day-to-day worries about household, family, business, whatever those things happen to be, behind. And, you know, all you do now is keep an eye on the bike, keep an eye on the traffic, and make time through the landscape.
Why do you think that is? Do you think that we, as humans, are inherently reluctant to give up comfort?
I think a lot of people are reluctant to give up comfort, or at least they're wary of discomfort. See, I think discomfort is an integral part of motorcycling. It may seem a little bizarre, perhaps, but I accept the wind, the cold, the rain, the sore backside, you know, the aching in the knees that you get after 300 or 400 miles, no matter what bike you're riding. There isn't a bike made, I don't think, that will keep you entirely comfortable from morning till night on a long ride. But if you accept that discomfort is part of the game, then it just becomes an integral part of the experience and not something to be avoided. In the same way that camping, you know, so many people my age say, "Oh, I'm too old to lie on the ground." You know, well, yeah, I accept that people's knees and hips don't work well, and they may be, you know, wearing out. But if you're not, just do it. Just, you know, it's not that bad. You know, you can accept a little bit of discomfort. And it becomes part of the experience.
Now you're in your 70s. Is camping at your age? Are you flipping the middle finger to the point of the fact that we are living in failing vessels? Do you think that's what that is? There a little bit of that?
No, I don't think so. I've always enjoyed it. You know, from a very early age, I was, you know, rock climbing, caving, and that kind of stuff in the UK, and long distance hiking, and always have done that kind of thing. And camping is just second nature, really.
Back to this point about travel and that point of no return. You've also written about a trip that you took where you did turn around, and I found this really interesting because no one talks about this, because it's almost like admitting failure in something. And of course, as humans, we don't like to do that, and especially as men and motorcyclists, we have a certain machismo to project. But I've often felt that when traveling. Sometimes I'll get out and I'll just think, you know, the roof is leaking on the shed, and the eaves trough has collapsed on the house, and it just seems so remarkably self-indulgent. And I'm incredibly self-indulgent as a person. And yet, even by my standards, I just think, shouldn't I be just getting stuff done?
Yeah.
And you had that experience too. I believe you headed out. You were heading west, really west. And what happened? And take us through that.
For quite a few years now. Well, since the last time I was out west, I've had the desire to get up to Yellowknife and get up on the Mackenzie Highway and some of those roads in the Northwest Territories. And the Eldorado was in dry dock, having some mysterious complaint. I can't remember which one it was, but there's always something going on. So I took the 2007 Moto Guzzi Eldorado with the intention of heading across Ontario and across the northern prairies, heading up, basically, well, as far north as you can go and still be on highway as a way of getting across the prairies before heading into the Northwest Territories. But after, well, the first night I camped in Wakami Lake Provincial Park, which is up by Chapleau, and then across to Nipigon. And by the time I got to Nipigon, I stayed again in a motel, and I was checking the fire forecast because there'd been a lot of information in the news about forest fires, and it was quite clear that northern Manitoba, northern Saskatchewan, northern Alberta, and especially into the Northwest Territories were, if it wasn't, if there weren't active forest fires along the route, there was going to be so much haze and smoke and such like that it didn't seem very appealing. So I decided to turn around. But the fact is, in retrospect, I recognize that it wasn't so much because of the smoke and the fires that I was avoiding. It was that I just somehow my desire to complete that trip was not there. And I did indeed, as you suggested, feel that it was a bit of a personal letdown. Why was I chickening out? But I guess if you're just not feeling it, if a journey isn't really inspiring you the way that you hope it is, then it seems sort of pointless to continue. And as I think I said in the whatever I wrote about it, better to return home fairly quickly and save my travel dollars for a day when I'm, better set to do it.
I find that the experience of travel is often very different than our idea of travel before we set out. I think we look forward to these trips. And of course, I know when I plan a trip, it's always sunny and it's always, 73 degrees Fahrenheit. And the winds are calm. And the roads are clear. And of course, it never works out that way, does it? You get on the road and there's always something. There's you lose your passport, you can't find your wallet, or your tire's losing air, or something like that. And that is just part of travel. I just finished reading a book about a man who rode from California to all the way through Central and South America. And it seemed like every day, he was being, the border authorities were shaking him down for money. It was just a constant barrage of stuff that gets in the way. But of course, you can't look at it that way. You have to just take a trip in its entirety, don't you?
Yeah.
That the good, the bad, and everything is the trip. It's not getting in the way of the trip. It's just, and travel is like that, isn't it?
It is. It's more to do with the state of mind than the conditions, I think, because the conditions from that particular trip that we're just talking about were perfect. The bike was running well. It was comfortable. The weather was, perfectly acceptable. It was more my state of mind that was the problem. On previous trips, like the previous time I'd ridden across the country, I'd been going from Yorkton to Lethbridge, and it was absolutely miserable rain and wind the whole way, 800 kilometers or so. But I was happy as a, as a pig in shit. I was quite comfortable. It was just part of the journey, and that was it. It wasn't, the conditions were having no effect on my state of mind. But on the trip, hoping to go to Yellowknife, it was my state of mind that really intruded.
I remember the great writer Peter Egan talked about that. I remember reading that he said that sometimes when you ride in the rain, there's almost and I'm very much paraphrasing here, but there's almost a certain smugness you can get that, at a certain, unless you are soaked to the bone, at which point I'm just so miserable. I want a truck to run over me. But up to a certain point, if you're reasonably comfortable, there's almost like, well, the worst is happening. It can't begin to rain when it's already raining, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's kind of as bad as it's going to be, and you just settle in. And sometimes there's a very you kind of withdraw into your own thoughts even more, I find, in rain. And I think some of the most sort of personal riding, if that makes sense, that I've ever done has been in rain or weather that is just sort of flirting with the point that it's cold enough that you really maybe shouldn't be out there.
Yeah.
And have you found that experience as well on some of your trips?
Yeah, well, I always talk about riding, long days as sort of moving meditation anyway. But particularly rain, as you suggest, seems to force you inwards like that. Your lizard brain is dealing with the motorcycle and and keeping the tires out of the really deep wet spots and out of the traffic and such like. And it gives your brain the opportunity to go off on its own little holiday and think about whatever it feels like thinking about. And there's something about that sort of the whistle of, or the sound of the tires on the road and the patter of the rain on your helmet and such like this perhaps encourages that kind of personal introspection.
And I think, both you and I have very different Italian motorcycles. I've got a Ducati, you've got the Guzzi, but they're 90-degree V twins with a similar cadence. And there's something about, I think twins in general could be anything, could be a Harley V twins in particular. But there's a certain, once they get going and they settle in and they're at a comfortable RPM, I think that, and I love low tonalities, which is why I've never gotten into like hair bands that the frequencies are too high. But there's a lovely rumble to a Guzzi that it really does feel like it can go forever, doesn't it?
It does. I think that's one of the reasons why I do enjoy taking it for long trips, because it just, as you say, settles in at 90, 100 kilometers, 105, 110 kilometers an hour, and it just feels like it wants to run all day. There's no sense that whatever you're doing is wearing it out or causing it any kind of discomfort. And you run all day until the fuel, well, on my bike, before I run out of fuel and have to switch on the reserve tap, and then you find somewhere to stop and get fuel, and then you fuel up and do the same all over again.
Now, we've talked about your love of Guzzis. You've got that 2007 Guzzi and then your 72 Eldorado. But beyond the Guzzis, you've owned some really bizarre motorcycles. You have, and I would say profoundly undesirable motorcycles, at least from the outside. It's the Suzuki Cavalcade, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Which is Suzuki's version of a Goldwing. And it looks like one of those bikes that would take 6 weeks to change an alternator with all the plastic. But do you still have it? Because weren't you flirting with selling it?
No, I flirt with selling it, but it hasn't gone yet.
What is it about that bike that you love?
It has a wonderful engine. The V4 engine in it is just it's got long gears. It's powerful. Well, powerful in my terms, at least, because I think it's better. 112 horsepower. It'll roll that bike along the road beautifully, pretty much any speed you choose. But I suppose it's the styling as well. It's got that. To me, it looks like some sort of 60s American Chrysler or Dodge. I always think of the Dodge Polara I had when I was up in the Sioux, one of my first cars up there. It's big and it's heavy and it's overstyled in every conceivable way and excessive. I mean, it's sort of classic North American excess, even though it's a Japanese bike. And riding it, it's smooth, it's comfortable, it's reliable. It's just fun to ride for me.
And because that wasn't strange enough, you had to get a Pacific Coast Honda.
Yeah. Well, that was.
Tell me
Sorry.
your experience on that one.
Well, that was one of Norm's finds. He bought it as a project, and I saw it in his garage and said, "Why don't you sell that to me?" I think he paid $700 for it, so I gave him the same. And, basically there was a good bike hiding under some really ghastly bodywork. So I spent a little time cleaning up the bodywork. It was still a ghastly looking thing, but it was enjoyable to ride. The irony is I'd ridden one before and had been completely underwhelmed. And so this was an opportunity to see whether I was still underwhelmed for a very low price. So I got it going, and I rode some back roads in Northern Ontario and such like, and found that surprisingly, I kind of liked it. But then when I bought the Brever, it was one too many bikes in the garage, so I sold it on to somebody else who could enjoy its bargain basement reliability.
Now, given the kind of riding that you do and the speeds that you do, I mean, I think the obvious thing is someone listening to this might say, well, why not a DR 650 Suzuki or a KLR 650? That would seem, you look at your age and all the parameters and what you require from a bike, and you think, well, those would be a good fit, but that's not what you go for. Have you thought about those bikes or other bikes that might be better in gravel than your Guzzi?
Yeah, I've played with that idea, the DR and the KLR, and indeed I did own a KLR 650, well 683 I think it was. It had the big bore kit on it for a little while, and actually I found I rode that faster than any of my other bikes. I'd go up to Ottawa and come back the back roads, heading for Perth and such like, and find myself doing 120, 130, not thinking anything about it. But while I understand that they would make more sense to me, they just don't appeal to me in the same way. I suppose I like the bizarre and the old, and yeah. I roll up to a Tim's sometime on the 72 Eldorado, and it's like a guy magnet. Not that I'm particularly eager to have a guy magnet. But,
just to clarify, not that there's anything wrong with that, of course.
No, of course not. But people will come and talk to you about the bike, because even people that aren't motorcycle aficionados recognize that it's not your ordinary everyday bike. The Cavalcade and the Goldwing, and to a lesser extent the Pacific Coast, are basically invisible. So I suppose part of me likes that kind of exotic, likes the fact that I'm riding something that's a little out of the ordinary.
Now, you see, most of the bikes I've owned have been, for some reason, I need a degree of unnecessary mechanical complexity in the devices I owned, that I continue to own, rather. And the conversations that you have, and maybe those who are listening who don't or haven't owned older bikes may be immune to this, and consider yourself lucky. But old bikes really are a magnet for some really bizarre exchanges, aren't they? My favorites are the people who come up and tell you everything about the bike that you've had for 30 years.
Yeah, you get that from time to time. But often it's I bumped into a guy in northern BC. I walked into a coffee shop early in the morning, and he looked out at the bike and he said, "Was that a 72?" You go, "Oh, you're keyed in here." So sometimes you meet people that actually, know their onions, and that's pleasant to sit and talk with them. Other people just ask, is that made by Harley, or, who makes those, or, how many miles has it got on it, and conversations like that. And that's all fine. I enjoy that, especially, when you've been on the road for a few hours and it's time for a break, and kind of nice to have a little chat.
Now, here's a question I always ask to Guzzi owners, especially owners of old Guzzis, which is, why don't you just buy an Airhead BMW? Because that's kind of the obvious bike in that sort of vein. And
Yeah.
and I always garner from that from people like you, and I'll let you speak for yourself in a second, but it's always like, well, you don't play well with others, so you can't own what everyone else owns. You've got to do your own thing. So have you owned an Airhead BMW?
I have not owned an Airhead BMW. I have ridden many Airhead BMWs. A good friend of mine, Dave, has 5 or 6 of the things, and if we meet up for a coffee or pancakes or something, I'll ride his bike and he'll ride mine for a while, and we do that sort of swap. And I suspect if at the time that I'd been looking for that first bike, an Airhead BMW had cropped up, I might have been tempted in that direction. But having bought the Guzzi, and then having now ridden that, multiple Guzzis and many Airhead BMWs, I'm not attracted to Airhead BMWs to the same extent as I am to the Guzzis. It's just something about the way the engine feels. I get on an Airhead and I go, yeah, I could ride this across the continent right now. They have that easy traveling feel, but it's not the same. It doesn't have that Guzzi V-twin thing.
The Lowdown Show is presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. What's next for you? Where do you want to go, or what do you want to do on a motorcycle?
I'm playing with that idea at the moment. I mean, obviously, this coming year, I hope to get back on the road and head for Yellowknife and get that out of the way. I suppose if there is such a thing as a bucket.
Has that been nagging you, that the fact that you turned around?
Well, it's the 3rd or 4th time I've headed in that direction and either had to change my plans or, quit altogether. Like the most recent time I crossed the continent, I ended up in Vancouver Island, but I had to cut south again because of forest fires and various other things. Or was that? It might have been floods in Manitoba at on that particular occasion. Anyway, there've been environmental obstacles to me getting up into that part of the Northwest Territories on more than one occasion. So yeah, that's my sort of main focus for the coming year. I dally with the idea of dropping over to the UK or probably Spain or France and renting a bike and riding around for a while. But those things may or may not happen.
Well, as long as you don't do anything normal like ride the Blue Ridge Parkway or something, I know that's far too conventional for you. You might see another car during the day.
Well, that's true, and more other bikes as well. I'm not terribly interested in crossing the border in that direction, and there's plenty of Canada to explore. I think as having left one country and moved to another, part of me feels that I should thoroughly explore this new one that I've been in for the last 40 odd years. And if there are any roads that have escaped me, then I need to make sure that I've been down them.
Nick Adams has self-published a number of books. Type Nick Adams Motorcycle into Amazon's search engine and you'll discover a stockpile of worthy reading material. In closing words from our sponsor, picture this. You're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. But it's okay because whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got simply everything. Brake rotors, lights, and tire exhaust systems, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.